You ever hear a sound so wrong, so out of place, that your body reacts before your brain catches up? That's exactly what happened the moment bang, 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 cut through the quiet afternoon like an alarm going off in a church. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't construction. It was sharper than that. Metal on metal, with the kind of rage behind it that makes your spine lock up. I bolted for my apartment window, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Down in the visitor parking lot of Oakwood Heights, Margot Westfield, HOA president, suburban menace, and self-proclaimed guardian of all things beige and boring, was swinging a claw hammer at my brother's Tesla. Not just swinging, attacking, unleashing blow after blow, like she was fighting off an invader, her carefully curled blonde hair bobbing with each strike. Her manicured hands gripped tight around the hammer's handle, like it was a weapon of divine judgment. Her screams echoed across the courtyard about community standards, visual harmony, and something about how that abomination of a car was lowering property values. For a few heartbeats, I just stood there in shock, unable to process what I was witnessing. It was so absurd, so surreal, that my brain refused to connect the dots. My younger brother Liam's Tesla, gleaming black and still dusty from a long highway drive, was parked legally in a visitor spot. No flat tires, no broken windows, no oil leaks, just dust from a road trip. And Margot, in her cream-colored blazer and rage-glazed eyes, was beating it like it had personally offended her family name. Until that moment, I had kept a pretty low profile in the neighborhood. I moved into Oakwood Heights for the peace and the amenities, not the drama. I'm Garrett Fletcher, electrical engineer by trade, calm by nature, and someone who's spent enough time in the military to know when not to escalate. But this wasn't just HOA harassment. This was personal. And for Liam, it cut even deeper. Liam had just come back from his third deployment in Afghanistan as a military physician, a quiet, humble guy who'd patched up soldiers in makeshift tents while bullets flew overhead. After nearly a decade of service, he was finally back on US soil for good. He'd driven down from our parents' house to visit me, maybe even scout out the area for his next home. That Tesla, it was his first big civilian purchase. The car meant something to him. It represented freedom, stability, a clean start. And now it had 3 fresh dents and a shattered headlight, courtesy of someone who believed her HOA title came with a badge and a scepter. Earlier that day, things had been so normal. Liam called to say he was on his way down. I warned him, of course, told him to park in the visitor spots, not even a toe over the line. The HOA president here's got a magnifying glass for rules and a clipboard full of citations, I'd joked. He laughed. He'd heard worse. He'd seen worse. This was supposed to be a relaxing visit. When he arrived, his Tesla was a little dusty from the long drive, but parked exactly where it should be. We hugged, caught up, walked around the complex, and finally settled on my third-floor balcony with a couple of beers. It had been over a year since we'd seen each other in person, and we were halfway through laughing over a childhood story when the first scream pierced the air. Who owns this disgusting vehicle? This is not a junkyard. We stood, leaned over the balcony, and saw her, Margot, standing next to his car like a judge at a crime scene. Designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the overcast skies. She looked more like she was posing for a political ad than addressing an actual issue. Her outfit was painfully perfect. Pressed slacks, expensive heels, and that ever-present clipboard. Next to her, Liam's Tesla sat quietly, looking out of place only because it wasn't beige. "I think that's your welcoming committee," I muttered. Liam sighed, the deep, weary kind that only someone who's seen actual chaos can produce when faced with this brand of suburban insanity. "Let's go handle this," he said, already moving toward the door. By the time we made it downstairs, Margot had already slapped a glaring orange violation sticker dead center on the Tesla's windshield. She was typing furiously on her phone, fingers flying like she was sending coordinates for an airstrike. Liam approached first, calm as ever. "Excuse me, is there a problem with my vehicle?" Margot didn't look up right away, then slowly turned her head with a look of exaggerated disgust. "Yes, this thing violates our community standards. Section 8, paragraph 3 clearly states all vehicles must be clean and well maintained. This one is dusty, unkempt, and an eyesore." I stepped forward. "Margot, he's parked in a visitor spot. This is my brother Liam. He's here for the day. He just got back from active duty." Her eyes narrowed as she looked him over again, like she was inspecting a stray animal. "Well, your brother needs to take this mud-covered monstrosity to a car wash immediately. It's ruining the aesthetic of Oakwood Heights." Liam, ever the diplomat, nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll get it washed after I spend a little time with my brother. It's been over a year." But Margot wasn't listening. "I don't care if you just returned from the moon. Rules are rules. Clean it or I'll have it towed, and I won't warn you again." That's when I saw something flicker across Liam's expression. Not anger, but something quieter and heavier. The kind of look you see on someone who's carried stretchers through gunfire, who's sewn up enemies and allies alike, who's seen the worst and chosen compassion anyway. "Ma'am," he said with a steady voice, "I understand your concern. I drove here from Fort Benning. My Tesla picked up some dust, but I followed all the parking rules." She scoffed. "Military. That explains everything. No respect for structure or proper community upkeep." I felt my fists clench, but Liam placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. He was still calm, still composed, but I could feel the tension building. Margot's phone rang. She held up a finger in our faces, then turned away to answer. "Yes, Patricia, I'm handling it. There's a serious violation here in the visitor lot. I've already issued a citation." She paced a few steps away, her voice trailing off but her disdain as loud as ever. We turned to head back upstairs, hoping she'd tire herself out. But she wasn't done. As we reached the building entrance, the sound of her car trunk popping open froze us in place. I turned just in time to see her reach into the back of her spotless white Mercedes and pull out a hammer. A real, steel-headed claw hammer. "She wouldn't," Liam said quietly. But even as the words left his mouth, bang, she would. And she did. The hammer came down again, this time with a sickening crunch that echoed off the surrounding buildings like a firecracker exploding in slow motion. The hood of Liam's Tesla bent under the force, a deep dent blooming in the polished black metal. Margot didn't hesitate. If anything, she looked energized by the destruction, her arm swinging again with unhinged determination. The second blow shattered the headlight. Glass fragments flew into the air like sparks, bouncing off the pavement in chaotic little skips. I was already sprinting, Liam right beside me, hearts hammering as we rushed to intercept the HOA president-turned-vigilante. The third strike crushed part of the driver's side door before either of us could reach her. She was screaming now, unfiltered and wild. "This junk doesn't belong in my community." Her voice cracked like a whip through the air, shrill with self-righteousness. It wasn't about dust or visitor spots anymore. This was personal. This was power, control, something deeper than just rules printed in an HOA handbook. This was someone who believed she was the law, and that hammer in her hand. That was her gavel. I reached her first, grabbing her wrist mid-swing before the fourth blow could land. Her skin was cold, tense with fury, and she fought me like a cornered animal. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, trying to jerk her arm free. But I held firm. "What are you doing, Margot? You've lost your damn mind." Her face was red now, her lips curled into a sneer, and her voice was so loud The nearby car alarms were nothing in comparison. I am enforcing our community standards. This vehicle is a violation. I am allowed to remove violations as HOA president. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She truly believed that her authority extended to physically destroying someone's property with a weapon. And still, somehow, she stood there with the confidence of someone convinced she would face zero consequences. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the noise. First a couple, then half a dozen. They stood near the walkways and stairwells, whispering, staring, phones in hand. I barely noticed them at first. All I could see was the damage on the car and the look on Liam's face. He stood motionless, a few feet behind me, just staring at his Tesla like he didn't fully understand what he was looking at. 3 big dents, a shattered headlight, scratches down the side that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just looked at the car with that heavy, faraway stare I'd seen before, on the faces of soldiers who had just watched something sacred torn apart. That car wasn't just transportation for him. It was his first step into normal life, into something peaceful, something earned. It was his way out of a world that had demanded everything and given him back scars. And now it sat there ruined, not by war, not by accident, but by a woman wielding a hammer in the name of a neighborhood rulebook. "You have no right to do this," I said, stepping in front of her. "This is private property, and this is criminal damage." She rolled her eyes and gestured broadly at the gathering crowd, clearly trying to rally support. "I have every right. I am the president of this association. This vehicle is an eyesore and a disgrace to Oakwood Heights. It was dirty, and that violates our standards." I could hear gasps from the people nearby. Neighbors who had previously just nodded politely in hallways, now wide-eyed and frozen, as Margot defended her rampage like it was a civic duty. One woman muttered, "She's finally lost it," and someone else whispered, "She's going to jail." Margot didn't seem to notice the tide turning. She was too deep into her fantasy of authority. Then, finally, Liam spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was low, clear, and full of the kind of weight that made people go silent. "Ma'am, do you realize what you've just done?" That single sentence stopped even Margot for a heartbeat. She turned toward him slowly, her expression twitching between indignant and uncertain. "I've enforced the rules," she said, but even she sounded less convinced now. Liam nodded slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Excuse me for a moment." He stepped aside, pressing a number with a steady hand and putting the phone to his ear. I could hear the shift in his tone immediately. Professional. Director. The kind of voice that doesn't ask. It commands. I kept standing between Margot and the Tesla, refusing to let her come any closer. She was still holding the hammer, though her grip was loosening. Her eyes darted between Liam and me, the growing crowd, the phones, the vehicle she'd just vandalized. "Who's he calling?" she snapped. "If he's calling a lawyer, he'll find our HOA bylaws are airtight. I've had them reviewed." I didn't answer. I just watched Liam as he nodded once, said a few quiet words, and ended the call. He returned to us calmly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Colonel Blackwood will be here in about 30 minutes, he said. I blinked. "Blackwood? You mean?" "Yes," Liam confirmed. "The Colonel." Margot scoffed. "I don't care if he's bringing the entire Pentagon. This is my community. Your military buddies have no jurisdiction here." Liam just smiled faintly. "Ma'am, you've damaged the wrong vehicle today. I'm not pressing charges yet, because I want you to meet the Colonel first. He has a unique perspective on community values." For the next 25 minutes, we stood in an uneasy silence, the kind that stretches and pulls at your nerves like an overdrawn bowstring. Margot refused to back down. She stood her ground as if still trying to justify what she had done, hammer still dangling from her fingers, like a badge she was no longer sure she had the right to carry. Liam knelt by his car, quietly inspecting the damage. Every scrape and dent told a story. I could feel the temperature drop around us, not from the weather, but from the mood, thick with tension and disbelief. Neighbors had begun whispering to one another, their faces hardening from passive curiosity to something closer to anger. Not at Liam, not at us, but at Margot. At precisely the 30th minute, we heard it. A deep rumble rolling in from the street, too low for ordinary traffic. I turned toward the entrance just in time to see 3 olive-drab Humvees rumble through the gate, followed by 2 black SUVs with government plates. The parking lot went dead quiet. The vehicles pulled into the visitor section like they were claiming territory, and the sound of doors opening and boots on asphalt followed. 6 uniformed personnel stepped out with practiced precision, their army dress uniforms crisp and commanding. From the lead SUV, a tall, broad-shouldered man emerged. Silver hair, chiseled jaw, the unmistakable air of a man who had faced battle and led men through it. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood. He walked straight toward us, taking in the damaged Tesla, the hammer still in Margot's hand, and the stunned expressions on every face in the lot. "Dr. Fletcher," he said, extending his hand to Liam. "Good to see you, son. I only wish it were under better circumstances." Liam nodded. "Thank you for coming, sir." The colonel turned to me. "Sergeant Fletcher, I presume?" I returned his handshake. "Former, sir, but honored nonetheless." And then his eyes landed on Margot, who for the first time seemed unsure of herself. "And you must be the individual who decided to take a hammer to Dr. Fletcher's vehicle," he said coolly. Margot bristled. "I'm Margot Westfield, president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. This vehicle was in violation of our standards." The colonel raised a hand and cut her off with the kind of grace that doesn't need to shout. "And your community standards include felony-level destruction of private property?" She opened her mouth to protest again, but the colonel wasn't finished. "What I'm here to explain," he said, turning not just to her but to everyone now watching, "is whose vehicle you've damaged today. Dr. Liam Fletcher served 3 tours as a combat surgeon in Afghanistan. On his last deployment, his unit's field hospital came under attack. Despite the danger, he remained at his station, performing a life-saving surgery on a critically wounded soldier. When the medevac was hit and chaos erupted, Dr. Fletcher carried wounded soldiers through live fire to safety. He saved 12 American lives that day, including mine." He unbuttoned the top of his dress shirt, just enough to show the scar across his collarbone. "A piece of shrapnel would have ended my life if not for this man." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Neighbors who once waved politely were now whispering in disbelief. Margot's face went from flushed to pale, then to nearly translucent. The hammer slipped from her fingers, clattering to the pavement like a final gavel, striking down her authority. But the colonel wasn't finished. "You attacked a man who didn't flinch in the face of real danger, who chose peace and patience while you screamed and vandalized a car. And now, you're going to face the real consequences of your actions." At that moment, 2 police cruisers turned into the lot, lights flashing, sirens silent. They parked beside the Tesla. One of the officers approached Margot slowly. "Ma'am, we've received multiple calls about property destruction. We need you to come with us and answer some questions." Her mouth opened and closed as she tried to protest. "But I'm the HOA president. This car was violating." "Being HOA president doesn't entitle you to destroy someone's property," the officer cut in. "You're facing felony charges, depending on the repair estimate." Margot glanced around, suddenly realizing no one was standing with her. Not the neighbors, not the board, and certainly not the law. She went with the officers, eyes down, the image of her status cracking under the weight of reality. And as the cruisers drove off, the only sound left was the low hum of military engines cooling and the breath of a community that had just watched a tyrant finally fall. As the police cruiser turned the corner and disappeared out of the complex, something shifted in the air, like the whole neighborhood had exhaled for the first time in years. The hammer was gone. The shouts had faded. And Margot Westfield, once the untouchable queen of Oakwood Heights, had been escorted away in the back of a squad car, mumbling about bylaws and police chiefs who golfed with her husband. But the stunned silence that followed wasn't just about the spectacle of her arrest. It was the dawning realization among the residents that they had witnessed a reckoning. For years, Margot had ruled this community through fear, intimidation, and a labyrinth of rules she bent and broke to suit her own vision of perfection. That vision had now been shattered, literally, on the hood of a Tesla, owned by a man who had saved lives under enemy fire while she waged battles over hedge heights and porch lights. Colonel Blackwood, after watching the officers leave with a slow, satisfied nod, turned back to Liam. "I've taken the liberty of arranging for your vehicle to be transported to the base motor pool. Staff Sergeant Rivera still owes you his life. He'll oversee the repairs personally." Liam started to object, but the colonel raised a hand. "It's already done. Rivera's the best man for the job, and frankly, he'll be honored." Liam simply nodded, and in that silent exchange between a former commander and his medic, 1,000 words passed unspoken. This wasn't about dents and paint. It was about loyalty, about respect, earned in a place where titles meant less than integrity and courage. The Humvees rolled out just minutes later, the Tesla secured and en route to be restored, leaving behind a parking lot that felt more like the aftermath of a revolution. The neighbors began to slowly step forward from their doorways and stairwells, like survivors emerging from bunkers after a storm. Faces that had once peered cautiously from behind curtains now approached with purpose. Apologies flowed. Words of gratitude poured out. "We're so sorry," said a mother of two from the second floor. "We didn't know who she was targeting next." An older man with a cane introduced himself as Walter and pulled me aside. "Some of us have been trying to vote her out for years," he whispered. "We just never had enough people willing to stand up. After today, that changes. You and your brother did more than protect a car. You gave us our backbone back." Over the next few hours, messages poured in from neighbors, some who had never spoken a word to us before, offering to help, asking if Liam was okay, and expressing collective embarrassment for what Margot had done. Word traveled fast. By the time the sun dipped behind the complex rooftops, Margot's downfall was the only thing anyone was talking about. By midweek, the Oakwood Heights HOA board, clearly panicked by the overwhelming public response, released a formal statement. It included a written apology to Liam, a condemnation of Margot's actions, and a swift declaration. She had been officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The board also announced an emergency policy review, promising changes to enforcement procedures and transparency. It was more than just damage control, it was survival. They knew the community was ready to tear down everything Margot had built if they didn't act. 3 days after the incident, Liam returned to pick up his Tesla from the base. It gleamed under the late morning sun, pristine and better than new. Rivera had done more than just fix the damage. He'd detailed it, polished it, even added a few subtle upgrades to the interior and sound system. "Consider it a small thank you from the guys you patched up," Rivera had said with a grin. When Liam pulled back into Oakwood Heights that afternoon, the transformation was immediate. Neighbors waved. Children peeked out with curious smiles. And waiting in front of the community center was Walter, the same man who'd once tried and failed to oppose Margot, now serving as interim HOA president. He'd organized a small gathering in Liam's honor. Nothing grand, just a few tables with homemade food, drinks, and a sign that read, "Welcome home." Residents brought casseroles, cookies, and handshakes. Several veterans from the surrounding county had shown up as well, having heard the story from Rivera or others at the base. They spoke with Liam, shared stories, and asked about his plans. One woman brought her teenage son and quietly asked Liam if he would talk to him about military medical careers. The shift in atmosphere was undeniable. A neighborhood once ruled by passive fear had become a place of gratitude and community. Liam and I stood in the corner for a while, watching the faces, the laughter, the lightness. "So, what do you think?" he asked, sipping a lemonade. "Should I look for a place nearby?" I chuckled. "Honestly, with Margot gone, it's probably the nicest neighborhood in the state." He nodded. "You know, I've been deployed to hellholes where people still manage to be kind to one another. But this, it took a hammer and a lot of restraint to bring out who people really are." A month later, Liam signed the lease for an apartment just 2 buildings over from mine. Move-in day was something out of a movie. A convoy of trucks and vans arrived, not just with furniture, but with people. Veterans from across 3 counties, who had heard his story through Rivera, through Blackwood, through the grapevine of soldiers who never really stopped looking out for their own. They came ready to lift, haul, patch, and fix. Colonel Blackwood himself showed up with a massive duffel bag and a gift tucked under his arm, a custom security system for Liam's Tesla, courtesy of the base's electronic warfare team. "We may not be here every time," he said, "but we'll make damn sure you never have to deal with another hammer-wielding lunatic without backup." As for Margot, she eventually pleaded guilty to felony-level property damage. The judge, a Vietnam veteran who recognized Liam's name, ordered her to pay full restitution and serve 200 hours of community service at the local VA hospital. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The last we heard, Margot and her husband had put their condo up for sale and were exploring quieter neighborhoods, ones without HOAs, if the rumors were true. The chapter had closed for good. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the board or the bylaws, it was in the people. Walter's leadership brought sanity back to the HOA. Rules still existed, but now they were applied with empathy, not ego. Regular neighborhood events began. Cookouts, book clubs, even an annual community barbecue to honor veterans, held every spring. Liam was named the honorary guest at the first one, standing next to him, hearing the stories people shared, watching the kids draw chalk flags on the sidewalk. I realized how much had changed since that insane afternoon. Not just here, but in me, in Liam, in everyone. Because what started with a hammer ended in healing. Margot had tried to enforce control through fear. Liam, without lifting a finger in retaliation, showed what real strength looked like. He reminded a neighborhood what it meant to serve, to protect, to lead by example. And that quiet strength, honest, resilient, unshakable, was what truly restored this place. So now, whenever I see a dusty car in a visitor spot, I don't cringe like I used to. I smile, because I know better. You never know who's behind the wheel. It might just be someone who's lived through things you can't imagine, and who chose, despite it all, to come home with peace in his heart and dignity in his stride. And if anyone ever forgets that again, well, Oakwood Heights will be ready.